Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, The Cyber Threat Landscape Evolution, How the Pandemic Changed the Attack Surface in Healthcare. You're joining Damo Consulting and Palbox today, and this is our latest webinar. We have a great presentation for you. And before we get started, we're just going to go over some housekeeping items here. So just an FYI for everyone, you are muted. We ask that you scroll down on the screen to ask questions or submit any questions you have via the chat, and we will respond to those later in our meeting, in our broadcast. And also polling questions will be launched throughout the presentation, so please answer those to the best of your knowledge. There are no wrong answers at all. So today, this is an overview of our webinar and what we will be talking about today. So just a quick overview. We will explain what is Palbox. We will introduce our panelists and give a brief overview of their background. And then we'll dive into the presentation and roundtable discussion, wrapping it up with some Q&A if time allows. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and launch our first polling question. And if you could please just answer to the best of your ability, and we'll wait just a minute or two for people to give some answers before we move on to our presentation. Wonderful, great. Looks like people are answering. Thank you very much for doing that. And wait one more minute and see if we can't get some more responses before we move on. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now, and we will move on to our presentation. Okay, so now who is Palbox? Here's what we do. We provide secure email for modern healthcare right out of the box. We are HIPAA compliant email encryption and marketing for modern healthcare. Senders can write and send emails as normal from any device, and we seamlessly encrypt the message without the need for plugins or portals. We take your data very, very, very seriously, as I'm sure that everyone else does, and which is why we are proud to have the Palbox Email Marketing Suite Standard Plus and Premium Email API and Palbox Marketing. We have received the High Trust Certification CSF certified status. For those of you who don't know, High Trust CSF certified status means that our solutions have met key regulatory and industry-defined requirements and are appropriately managing risk. And we are the very first HIPAA-compliant email provider to achieve this certification, and we are quite proud of it. Zero Trust Security for email is now part of the Palbox Email Suite Plus and Premium. We've added this new feature at no additional cost. It's part of our commitment to market leadership in the HIPAA compliant email sector. In 2017, in August, we filed a formal patent application with the US Patent Office, and we're pleased to announce that all 20 claims were granted for our patent method for securely communicating email between sender and a recipient. Fast forward to today, and we're pleased to announce that all 20 claims were granted for US patent number 10904266, system and method for verifying the identity of email senders to improve email security within an organization. So what do our customers think? We are honored that we are currently the #1 email encryption software according to G2. And now let's move on to our speakers. We are pleased to myself, I am Jen Panel. I'm the event marketer here at Powbox. I will be your host today, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Paddy Padmanabhan, who is the CEO of Damo Consulting, who will be our moderator for our roundtable discussion, along with our two speakers, Tony Ucida-Velez, who is CEO and founder of Versprite, and Travis Taylor, account executive at Powbox. So let's just begin by having our speakers introduce themselves. Paddy, could you please share a little bit more about your experience with us?
Yeah, thank you, Jen. And it's a pleasure to be here among you. And I'm looking forward to this conversation with Tony and Travis. Cyber attacks have been in the news for a while. I run a digital transformation advisory firm that works with health systems that are accelerating their digital transformation roadmaps. And obviously, there's a lot of technology implementations involved. There's a lot of change management. And obviously, the attack surface has increased in the process of accelerating the transformation. So there's a number of anecdotes that we are aware of as part of our work. I'm looking forward to discussing all of that as part of this conversation.
Wonderful. Now I'll turn it over to Tony Ucida-Velez, and just Tony, give an introduction and tell us about yourself a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. This is Tony Ucida-Velez, or I go by Tony UV. I'm the founder and CEO of Versprite. We're a cybersecurity consulting firm focusing on serving the global needs of various multinational companies. I'm also an author of risk-centric threat modeling, which is it's basically a threat modeling methodology that was endorsed by the cybersecurity czar at the White House under the Obama administration. And I'm also the chapter leader and president of the Open Web Application Security Project in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. And last but certainly not least is Travis Taylor from Powbox. Please introduce yourself, Travis.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen, and great to see everyone here today. So I am an account executive on the Powbox sales team here. So I work with all healthcare organizations that reach out to Powbox who are interested in our HIPAA compliant and high trust certified email suite, email API, and marketing solutions. So anyone that comes and reaches out to Powbox, I'm usually their first point of contact. So if you ever need any questions, always feel free to reach out, and definitely looking forward to this conversation. As Paddy said, cyber attack has been in the news consistently, and there's a lot of new information that's out there today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, now that we've done our introductions, I'm going to launch another poll for everybody. This one is very interesting. Just what type of threats have affected you over the past 24 months? So it'll be nice to hear if any have been affected by some of these threats. We'll give it just another minute before we go into Tony's presentation. Give it one more second. It looks like people are answering. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. I'll publish the results really quickly. It looks like, yes, people have had threats in the last 24 months. So it seems like it's increasing, as we know, and that's why we're all here today. So on that note, I will go ahead and move into Tony's presentation, and take it away, Tony.
Thanks so much. Yeah. So, what I want to bring today for everyone is really kind of try to shape, when I provided some of this, content from our threat advisory group. We have a threat intel group that monitors threat actors and looks at different types of evolving attack patterns that are out there against organizations. There has been a lot that's happened since, this recent report from Palo Alto. There's nothing surprising here where, that our threat intel group is saying right now, where there's an increase in targeted cyber attacks. The pandemic changed the landscape. It went from looking at, corporate domains and environments, and they're still very much on the radar. It's not like it's been completely a shift, but, attackers realize that in a pandemic world, and there's still a lot of places that are very much living and working remotely, that there is a heavy dependency on remote connectivity. There's a heavy dependency on home networks and home routers, and the insecurities that exist within those respective non-authorized IT environments have had to really be the backbone, if you will, of many employees connecting to their environment. So, we see medical, we see, just as recent as this past week, manufacturing and with JBS Meats compromised, the Brazilian-owned meat packaging company that is a multinational company. And then, of course, some of the other recent attacks, related to Colonial Pipeline and Scripps. The attack landscape is just getting more sophisticated. We see some of the ongoing trends with phishing, targeted attacks, the context that cyber criminals are obtaining of people's information allows them to really perpetrate better, allows them to have better business context for reaching out and to perpetrate seemingly believable emails. And so this is really leading to a lot of different successful different types of ploys. So, but the healthcare industry definitely is at the forefront, at a lot of this, because especially if we look at, the threats around ransomware and extortion, there's a lot of urgency and stress that has been put on the healthcare industry over the past, 12, 18 months. And with that operational stress, attackers are knowing this and are having to take advantage that, knowing that their time, money, and resources in healthcare might be in other mission critical operations and not necessarily in awareness, training, and cyber defense. If we can go to the next slide real quick. So, some examples here. So we see the yet another example in 2021, the Microsoft Exchange server exposed large targeted global for risk for small and medium businesses. And there was a vulnerability that was really taken advantage of. So, what's interesting today is that we see a lot of vulnerabilities that are coming about that might not have necessarily had exploit code. And now they are cyber criminals that are doing vulnerability research, and they are developing exploit code for what's known as NDAs, vulnerabilities that have been made known, but maybe there hasn't been particular exploit code that has been found in the wild. With the Exchange server, we saw a huge impact. There was a lot of impact, especially for SMBs, and a lot of that SMB market is actually in healthcare. We see, dentist offices, maybe small medical practices that are private in nature that were really, greatly affected by these compromises and with these Exchange servers. And so, what we see is a lot of those smaller companies having to make a decision. Do I go to the cloud like some of my larger, corporate enterprise counterparts, or do I try to have a smaller IT footprint managed by someone else, where some of the risk is, is what we saw, recently with vulnerabilities being managed by smaller IT groups. Things sometimes don't get adequately protected, adequately patched, adequately architected, and so we run into difficult situations as basically revealed by this particular incident. Now, if we go one more slide. So we're still in a pandemic world, right? There is the vaccine, multiple different flavors of it, but we're still seeing, proliferation of various strains come and go. And there's the concern of like, are we climbing over the hill into a new horizon of a non-post-pandemic world, or are we still going to be with remote workforce learning and working in education and so forth? And so that picture really depicts what, at least in the United States and in large parts of Western Europe, you see, the home network being divided into, students, parents, small businesses, enterprise, employees that are working from home. This puts a big focus on secure remote access. This puts a great focus on email security, security training. And then the major challenge of how do we secure these moving parts, maybe personal phone devices, personal laptops, definitely personal, routers and infrastructure in these homes that might be completely outdated in terms of firmware, in terms of software, that are interconnected with maybe, untrusted rogue assets. We talked about this zero trust model early on. as the solution set that Pawbox puts forth, but there isn't that level of benefit of the home network, right? There's an implicit trust model between, little Johnny's laptop or the IoT device in our fridge connected to our laptop that is basically managing sensitive information. It's all on the same network, on the same routable IP addresses. So, attackers and criminals know this landscape and are, trying to find attack patterns where they can learn those remote IT environments and exploit them. Okay, so there's some practical guidance that just come out of the gate. There's train is the common rhetoric. A lot of times, these types of reminders around endpoint security, mobile phone security, phishing awareness, and things like that, they are just easily forgotten, right? First in, first out types of thing in our memory. So it's important that employees are commonly trained, contractors are trained as well. It's also important to make the right investments. I was just talking to a client of ours recently where, with all of the recent extortion hacks that have been happening with Colonial Pipeline and now JBS, everyone has to have in the back of their corporate strategy, am I next? DNS, right? Domain name service is going to be something that criminals look to impersonate and perpetrate and try to do that for targeted employees that might not think twice about looking at a domain, that might not have the right certificate assigned to it. So there's a lot of domain security that's so important as it relates to our applications, or even our SaaS applications that we might be using as small and large businesses. The endpoint is definitely the new frontier. Defending the endpoint is critical, and there is like never before. Obviously, there's so many ways into the endpoint beyond the phishing email where you open up the malicious attachment or you click on the malicious link. You have drive-by downloads, you have malvertising where you're just simply doing surfing on the web and you might click on a link without actually really trying to qualify that domain as a normal user. It happens to the best and most savvy of technologists. So the endpoint is really a place where it should have an implicit zero trust with anything that it's in its surroundings in terms of its local area network at a remote office, but also online. Security configurations is hard to do. It's hard to configure endpoints that don't belong to you as a corporate environment, and especially more difficult when you're using technology that's in the cloud managed by someone else. But yet, it's important for organizations to take a look back in terms of where they can configure both SaaS-related applications that they're using and consuming, as well as endpoint solutions that are going to be connected to their infrastructure. Last but not least is the supply side considerations. You have attackers that are very much leveraging and trying to, there's a malware called TrickBot that has an OSINT capability and various others that are deployed onto networks where all they're doing is just simply playing a fly on the wall. They want to be a fly on the wall into your employees' home networks, corporate networks, even the networks of your SaaS providers, to understand the makeup, the technology makeup of the software that is running, the hardware that is running, the infrastructure that is running, et cetera. The poster child of that for 2021 is definitely SolarWinds. We see that SolarWinds vulnerability and compromise allowed for the usherance of cyber criminals to go into various US agencies and multinational companies. So if you're interested in more threat advisories, more information in terms of threat modeling or any types of other types of cybersecurity, data privacy, compliance related know-how, please follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter, and you can catch more of our security ramblings there.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to now launch another polling question. Just to give us a little bit more and see what you guys think about this one. Where do you feel your remote workforce hygiene is lacking? This might give us some talking points for our conversation. So please vote to the best of your ability, and then I will get it over to Paddy so he can start the roundtable discussion. I'll give it one more minute so everybody has a chance to vote. Like the votes are coming in. Okay, wonderful. I think everybody's had a chance. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and I'm going to share the results with everyone so you can see where people feel their remote workforce hygiene is lacking. And I think this would be a great starting point for our discussion, because it seems like we have a lot of people who think that they are lacking, and possibly security awareness and endpoint security would be an issue. So I'm going to go ahead and now hand this over to Patty.
Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you, Tony, for that brief presentation. I think you covered a lot of really, really important points. And I want to start off this discussion by providing a little bit of context and backdrop to what is going on in healthcare as the industry transforms itself for the future. So in a post-pandemic era, we are seeing virtual care accelerate in a very, very significant way. And I want to just mention three components of what virtual care represents, especially in the context of the topic of today's discussion, which is really what's happening to the attack surface and what kind of new vulnerabilities should we be thinking about. So one of the first thing that comes to my mind when we talk about it, the post-pandemic healthcare scenario is access to care through digital tools, through online tools. So today it's very common for people to go online to check their symptoms, to schedule an appointment, to make a copay through an online payment tool. And then, of course, when they do schedule the appointment, and if it's a primary care appointment or even an urgent care appointment, they could be doing the visit as a virtual visit through a telehealth platform. And then finally, as healthcare moves more and more into the homes, and Tony, you alluded to this in your presentation as well, we're going to see a lot of care being delivered in a home setting, whether it is primary care, whether it's urgent care, or whether it is chronic care management. So in all of these scenarios, we are now using tools, we're using entirely new modalities that present a lot of new opportunities for cybercrime actors. And so in that context, I want to open it up by just referring to a couple of recent incidents. Of course, Tony, you mentioned Colonial, and of course the recent one, JBS, which is just today, if you will. And Scripps Health in Southern California, which has really seen its access and scheduling systems seriously disrupted. And of course, a loss of service as a result of that. So let me open it up to you, Tony, and then we'll turn to Travis as well. What does all of this mean, this change of healthcare delivery to virtual care, and coinciding with an increase in cybercrime activities across the board? What does this all mean for health systems at a high level? Tony, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, at a high level, the use cases that are being introduced, over the past 5-10 years in healthcare are going to give way to new abuse cases. That there's that, relationship with use and function, there is abuse and dysfunction. And so cyber criminals and hackers look at function and use to see if it can be abused in terms of everything from business logic to exploiting vulnerabilities that the technology that's supporting those use cases might rely on. So let's look at telehealth workers, telehealth personnel, and infrastructure. A lot of that information is going to go to online systems. And cyber criminals don't have to be a 20-year IT veteran to know that as you're doing telehealth and receiving maybe video content, conversation dialogues that are being recorded, much like this, conversation here, that it's going to be being stored somewhere online, potentially in a vendor or potentially within a new infrastructure. So cyber criminals want to be able to get that intel because they might be interested in obviously protected health information for identity theft and other reasons, but also for targeted attacks to key U.S. officials, state representatives, iconic and well-off, influential billionaires that might be aging, that might be in a certain area, that might be, using the local hospital resources, patient portals, etc. And so intel is money in the cyber criminal world. And with new faculties and new mediums of supporting evolving use cases in healthcare, the manufacturers of those technologies and the purveyors of those technologies have to consider what their threat model looks like now as we evolve into a more hostile and really rewarding era for cyber criminals.
Travis, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I think those are all great points, Tony. I mean, technology has, its goal is to make our lives easier and to promote accessibility. Like you said, Patty, it's now we're getting all this virtual care where someone doesn't have to leave their own home. But with technology, it exposes and increases the more risk areas for cyber criminals to then target. So these guys are continuing to evolve. They're getting smarter and smarter. So just because the technology is improving the accessibility for individuals to seek care, you can't compromise and sacrifice the security of it. So it has to be an ongoing effort with all these new technologies and whatever health systems are implementing, because the more softwares that you implement, just again, the more attack surfaces that can be compromised. So it has to always be an ongoing effort. You can't be stagnant in what you're doing and just making sure you're keeping up with the latest trends, because there's scripts, there's JSB, there's the Ireland's HSE. So it's just going to be, we're going to continue to see these attacks in the news, and it's never going to stop.
One of the things, and both of you referred to the users. So one of the things we've seen as the aftermath of the pandemic is a shift towards a virtual workforce. And so users are more likely than not to be virtual in a lot of these new contexts. And so what are you seeing in your work in terms of the users becoming more aware of the risks that they're putting themselves and their organizations in, and what are they doing to protect themselves and their organizations at a high level?
I'll begin by saying that, what we see in the industry with different clients, and then before I started Versprite, 14 years ago on the other side, working for the enterprise, is you still see, the usual security awareness training rhetoric. And I say rhetoric in kind of a not a very respectful way, in the sense that a lot of the content is stale, right? A lot of the content is really not relatable. And so we're trying to approach a problem that's very unique to, attacking an organization, maybe attacking administrative personnel or people in healthcare operations or accounting or, other aspects with a general security awareness, control. And it doesn't really hit home how specific ploys against targeted individuals would actually work. So take a small medical practice with an office manager. The office manager calls the shots, from ordering new medical supplies to scheduling doctor visits, and maybe even having the last say for investing in the latest update to a patient portal. They're a central role within a small medical practice, and they might have some targeted phishing attacks, vishing attacks, smishing attacks. And the awareness training that's out there largely is not very tailored to those types of attacks. It's for that specific role and the context of what they do day to day. And so we find ourselves in security yet again, lagging behind some of the specific areas that we need to really kind of hone in on. But it has been an improvement. We see, a lot of organizations investing in learning management systems. Again, very generic. We see, larger healthcare technology companies doing like hackathons for their developers and engineers, kind of hands-on training where they're learning how to hack and their own applications. So that is beneficial. But, going back to the pandemic and remote work, I still think that the best exercise is to do simulated attacks and through social engineering, where you chase that exercise with a learning. And oftentimes what we do is we, do an exercise where we social engineer an organization, and then we funnel that into learning and say, this is how we got you. Here's why we perpetrated this vendor, or why we use this technique against you specifically in this role. It's because attackers are doing the same thing. Specific understanding of who their victims are, what their social media footprint is, what their technology makeup is in terms of what they're using at home, so that they conduct very targeted attacks. And that's where we're at a deficit in terms of awareness.
Let me follow up on that with one more question, Tony. And now we talked about remote users, but of course, healthcare itself is going more and more remote, except for the most acute conditions or procedures. You're likely to see a shift, a steady and accelerating shift of care in a home setting. So what that obviously means is that now you rely more and more on technology to watch your patients, to make sure that their conditions are not deteriorating, or if they need intervention suddenly for whatever condition that exacerbates. They're all watching it through remote monitoring devices, sensors, remote monitoring devices. In many cases, these are not devices that are necessarily going through high trust certifications, as an example. So there's a whole mixture out there. What are you seeing in this emerging landscape of home-based care that we should all be concerned about?
There's so many things there. You touched upon a lot of great points. One concerning aspect is, like you mentioned, these medical applications and products that are going to be injectables, wearables, these IoT enabled devices that may not go through the proper level of scrutiny through, let's say, the FDA. And, they get introduced. And so you have medical professionals that are making decisions off of what these devices or these applications are telling them, right? So as the cyber threats evolve, a massive, threat pattern that might be at play, if we all hear about in security, the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability of systems. Just looking at the integrity of medical information and what that does in terms of a ripple effect, right? The medical professional receives data, believes that information to be true, makes a prescription or a diagnosis based upon that information. What is to say that, the medical products or applications get tainted, right? And the integrity of that information is greatly affected. And then you have, there's already a lot of poor diagnosis through human error. Now imagine, adding on the aspect of, like, should I trust this data? Is this data correct? Has this data been, validated? Has it been tainted by, a threat actor? This is just one of several types of threat considerations that, major organizations and manufacturers of healthcare technology should be thinking about, and not using traditional approaches of just simply a checklist. Oftentimes in security, large organizations are just using checklists to see if their product or application is okay. And there's nothing wrong with these checklists. I think they're good. They're good starting points, but therein lies the problem. A lot of organizations don't look at it as a starting point. They look at it as a finish line, and they look at it as the end goal to product assurance or security assurance, and it's just the start. And so I think that until healthcare organizations begin to realize that is just the start, then we're going to see, some problems and compromises are going to be notable, which unfortunately will do only but raise and elevate healthcare costs, as companies now have to make additional investments into their products and services, and obviously cover those costs, right? So there's a lot of layers to that problem.
Yeah, so let me switch topics for a second here. So, in your earlier comments, you made a reference to the fact that the threats often could be upstream in supply chain. The Colonial was an example of that, where the breach was somewhere else and found its way into the system. As long as you're, as they say, the weakest link in the chain, the entire chain is compromised. So, Travis, let me ask you this: in your work at Paubox, through with the secure email product that you have, what have you seen that that has led you to identify these threats as emerging from a business associate, which is, in the world of healthcare, that's what we would refer to when we're talking about entities that are not part of the healthcare enterprise, but they're connected and networked with the healthcare enterprise. And we've seen examples of business associates being the cause of that. I think the most important one that comes to mind is Banner Health, where it was a cafeteria operator, their billing system, something like that. But anyway, what are you seeing in Powerbox that tells you where the threat is emerging from today?
Mm-hmm. So from a lot of I'd say my conversations with healthcare organizations, and in particular, really IT, IS, compliance professionals within these organizations, I mean, one of the big concerns is just end user awareness. So it's just a lack of training. They maybe, like Tony said, they do their annual training to hit the checklist, but I've always been taught that unless you're taught something 7 times, you don't really learn it. Like, you don't internalize that information. And as Tony was referring to, cybersecurity it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And it's honestly probably longer than a marathon, because it's just going to be ongoing, because there's always going to be new attacks coming in. So the most common breaches we're seeing are network breaches and email breaches. So that ranges from ransomware to malware to phishing attacks, spear phishing. I mean, there's all sorts of these that exfiltrate data or finances outside of the organization in the first place. And it's not just healthcare. Like we've seen with JBS, this is a meat producer. Going back a few months, there was Oldsmar, Florida. That was a water treatment facility where luckily they caught a hack that was rising the levels of sodium hydroxide. So that put human lives at risk, and luckily they were able to catch it. So one of the interesting points, I'd rewatched Tony's presentation from our summit a couple months ago, and the attacks are getting not only more sophisticated, but also more threatening and more dangerous. Intel is money, but now human lives are being put at risk. So one of the interesting conversations I have is how do we prove the ROI about investing in new cybersecurity tools? Because if things seem to be working fine at the moment, people don't want to act on it, because why should we be spending more money if it hasn't happened to us yet? But it's that whole mentality of, well, we could be next, like Tony was referring to earlier. So I think that's always one of the interesting components of the conversation is cybersecurity tends to not get allocated as much funding as it probably should be. And people wait until something happens, which we know creates a lot more financial constraints, takes a lot more time to remediate these actions. So I think until we start taking a more proactive than reactive approach, which you see not only in healthcare, but even the government, I don't think the situation will change for a long time until we see that come through.
What are you seeing, Tony, especially as it relates to business associates and partners?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that the BAA is really where the only thing that really kind of puts the BA in terms of thinking about, well, I got to be considering my clients' security requirements. But the reality is they're signing 5, 10, 50 maybe BAAs maybe a year, if not more. And so one thing I can tell you that's not happening is that no one's really reconciling what those requirements are. What is the net of all of the requirements that they're promising to their clients? And then and the reason for that is, and I did actually a talk at RSA one year about this, is you look at HIPAA, from the inception of the privacy rule to today, where you look at high tech rule that was implemented. There hasn't been a lot of wrist slapping. And so I think that, companies will try to just operate, in their for-profit type model by doing the least minimal. And I echo, Travis's point that not enough is being done, right, from a federal mandate. I think that HIPAA could definitely use a version 2 where there's a lot more teeth, and at least to reinvigorate, penalties and things like that. There's an OCR or wall of shame on HHS.gov that captures all the major breaches in healthcare. And if you look at it for the span since 1996, it's actually not a lot. So, what that tells, a lot of companies is, well, let me, instead of investing in cybersecurity, let me go ahead and, get 5, more great doctors, or maybe, do a technology refresh on this new oncology, system or whatnot. Things that are necessary and needed in order to have a distinguishing medical practice, no doubt. But at the, what can bring a practice on its knees is, as we've seen, is extortion threats, right? Ransomware. And, what's interesting is that ransomware is definitely the crime that pays, and it's paying a lot. And so what you have is a lot of cyber criminals and crime syndicates that want to get in on, this seemingly easy to launch attack plan, because all you're doing is really trying to get into the infrastructure, trying to do some OSINT, and ultimately trying to compromise a pivotal data source or an application source, and then see if you can cash in on an extortion request. And correlated with that is the rising value of that currency, right? Of the cryptocurrency market. We saw a dip in Bitcoin recently, but altcoins are definitely getting more popular. You have more common individuals now getting interested. You hear all these overnight millionaires that are basically made a lot of money with Dogecoin. And so that's not helping the situation, right? Because the payout is there. So healthcare entities, and their associated, business associates definitely need to look to do the right thing, because ultimately it's going to cost the industry more. It will cost them more if they get caught that with their, pants down, so to speak, and that's going to have years, if not potentially even over a decade worth of legal potential litigation for, showing possible negligence. And when it comes to human life and the aspects of, punitive damages that might have been triggered because of a lack in cybersecurity good hygiene, you might be talking well beyond, damages to reputational damage, but, financial damages that, extend well beyond the year of the inception of the incident. So, the common theme is that we're far behind, and the BAAs are really struggling to reconcile all of the different requirements, and are just honestly just trying to operate as best as they can with their own security adherence to HIPAA, if they're considering it, or even more high trust. But that's what we're seeing from our side.
Yeah, and you mentioned ransomware, and that is definitely the scourge of the day. And in many ways, what we're seeing today, as organizations are held to ransom with their with access to their system shut off, their data encrypted, demands for payments in crypto, for decryption keys, and so on. It reminds, if you go back in history a little bit, it feels a lot like the 60s and 70s, when kidnapping and extortion, for ransom used to be common. But we've kind of gone past that a little bit, and I'm wondering, again, the government had to play a part in some of that through policy action or forbidding certain kinds of payments and so on. But now you've got, on the one hand, cyber criminals becoming more and more sophisticated and more specialized. The whole thing is taking on the look of an organized business in many ways. And on the other hand, the government and policymakers are kind of behind the 8 ball a little bit when it comes to really understanding and addressing what is really going on with with this confluence of this rise in cryptocurrency values with the rise in cybercrime. It seems to be strongly correlated. So what, if any, action should the government be doing, if either of you have a comment on that? And what, if anything, should enterprises, specifically healthcare enterprises, be doing in this age of increased sophistication in cybercrime? You want to go first, Tony, and then we'll take a comment from Travis as well.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I think that what needs to happen in both the government sector and the private sector is that there needs to be more, just thinking outside the box. I mean, we've been thinking inside the box for way too long. Cyber criminals are evolving, and we're not evolving fast enough, right? I mean, most of the major, I would say, the Fortune 5,500 will get their queues to you based upon a major publishing of like, a Magic Quadrant alert, or, what is the name brand that is going to be safe for a CISO to elect in terms of a product that will, provide some level of metrics. But a lot of that is honestly smokescreen. And the people that work for these large or, organizations that are in the medical field, the underlying individuals, the directors, the practitioners, the engineers know that it's a smokescreen, know that there is what we call oftentimes in adverse right, Noah's Ark security, which is you have a lot of organizations that just say they open up a security catalog and they buy 2 of everything, right? That approach still exists, even though we see kind of iconic compromises like what happened with Target, where they were PCI certified, right? They did have, a lot of security bells and whistles, but it's about process, not just about, tools, right? It's a combination of those things. So there on the public sector, I think there needs to be a little bit more of a change up, and not necessarily, implementing more and more rigid standards that are kind of overbearing on healthcare entities, covered entities, to really absorb and to digest and then implement operationally, but to form maybe some greater, private thinking groups where that you take a lot of the innovation in the private sector and form like thinking groups that can dictate where should we go from here, right? Because right now in healthcare, a lot of it is a binary gap analysis. Where do I align to high trust 1, 2, 3? Where do I align to, HIPAA, in terms of its administrative, physical, technical controls, operational controls, and then that's it, right? And so we need to do away with this notion that we've reached these levels, these echelons, levels of security, which are, in the eyes of the status quo, the finish line, when they're in fact the starting line. And so criminals are thinking more dynamically, more agile than we are in healthcare. And I think it's going to take a little bit more creativity. There's a lot of different types of exercises to really start that. First, it begins with executive sponsorship from these types of corporate executives at the SMB and enterprise healthcare levels, right? They need to be able to get their weight behind investing in cybersecurity so that they can not just protect patient data, but also protect patient lives, which is going to be more and more at stake as we have implantables, wearables, injectables, that is going to be happening in the years to come.
Travis?
Yeah, I mean, the cyberspace is the new battleground. And that's what it really comes down to. It's a completely new environment where these issues are taking place. Unfortunately, I just keep seeing it. And once we see human lives being put at risk and actually lose some, that we won't take serious action until then. Again, Oldsmar, Florida, there was a COVID vaccine supply chain breach that happened as well. So there's plenty of areas and vulnerabilities at the federal level, local level, technology level. So I think that executive sponsorship, reimbursements for investing in technologies, because again, we're coming out of a pandemic where healthcare organizations lost a ton of revenue and their budgets are restricted now probably more than ever. Luckily, we're starting to turn a corner and patients are coming back in to help out with that. But until cybersecurity is put at the forefront of an organization, I don't see the situation changing whatsoever.
Well, that's great. It's a great discussion, and I wish we had more time, but I want to set aside a few minutes at least for any Q&A that may come through. With that, I'm going to turn this back over to you, Jen, if there's any questions that you want to open up with from the audience.
Excellent. I do not see any Q&A. So if anyone is out there and they have any questions, please type them in the bar, in the Q&A bar. But I don't see any currently. So you guys must have done a wonderful job of discussing all of the security issues that are currently out there and how we can properly deal with those as companies and as human beings, I think, because I think even as individuals, we need to kind of play a part in the security of and be asking these questions of our providers and companies we work with as well. So No questions at this point. Do you guys want to do a wrap up and some final comments?
Yeah, so I'm happy to do a wrap up. I think we're at a very interesting point in time when technology-led transformation in healthcare is accelerating, but so is the threat of exposure to cyber criminals, cyber attacks, and data breaches, and focus on security. The need for enhanced focus on security has never been greater. I think both as consumers of healthcare, both as caregivers and as administrators, we are seeing a landscape that is evolving very, very rapidly. I think it would be, it would be unfortunate if in our desire to accelerate, to take advantage of market opportunities or to meet competitive forces or whatever, we lose sight of cyber hygiene. We lose sight of the fact that we are living in dramatically altered times, and we are just one click away from crippling attacks. So I think if anything, this has got to be front and center in every strategy. And as with all things related to business, there's going to be some trade-offs. You've got to be really, really informed about the decisions that you make.
Any final thoughts from you, Tony?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's when it comes to the investing in security, I think that most executives out there will definitely on the record say it's important. The question comes down to, especially for publicly traded companies and those that are trying to bounce back economically from a very economically distressful year in 2020, is what can we do to get away with the most minimal investment? But they're not really looking at the threat impact implications, and that's really where the conversation really should really turn. What is the impact of viable threat patterns to my organization that are going to cost me more than what I'm willing to put down? Not just more, but by a multiple of 5, 10, 20, right? And so I think the understanding of the threat landscape, the likelihood for occurrence based upon credible threat intel, the state of my enterprise, the state of my house, so to speak, in terms of security control, adoption, and maturity, right? Based upon where my organization is today, how likely is it that some of these attack patterns that are supporting these threat claims that are evolving is to happen? And then if I have that information, then now I'm in a dangerous area as an executive, right? Because if I don't make the right moves to invest in cybersecurity, and if there is a breach or an incident that affects protected health information, or even worse, human life, then we're now going to be in a legal area that's going to be introducing a lot of words called negligence, right? And the word negligence is a powerful word for prosecutors to leverage to show that an organization, knowing A, B, C, still did not make the necessary precautions, especially for nominal investments that really dwarf, comparatively speaking, to the impact of human life or information compromise. It's honestly going to be a difficult situation for a lot of executives. And now, especially that we see a lot of privacy watchdogs looking at how companies are managing information, right? This is definitely privacy. There was a notion before in security that one said privacy is dead. Well, privacy is resurrected, but it's resurrected almost like as a zombie. It's haunting a lot of organizations today, where if they don't do the right thing, then there could be legal implications in terms of how poorly they were a steward of the information that was bestowed to them by a patient or by a covered entity. So anyway, a lot to think about, and a lot of opportunity for considering a better strategy in security. And I think that's where we're all here to help.
Awesome. And Travis, final thoughts from you?
Gosh, Tony, that's a pretty scary thought, but it definitely rings true about privacy being dead or resurrected as a zombie. One of the things that we talk about here at Palbox is usability and security need to coexist for an effective cybersecurity strategy. credit to Julie Haney from NIST for that one. But it speaks true. The organization needs to implement tools that set them up for success in the long run, and that do their best to remove any responsibility or adding friction to the end user's day-to-day workflow and responsibility. Because we know that humans are the most common vector for attacks to happen. By clicking on those links, by updating an invoice or updating a bank change request form to reroute funds outside the organization. So you have to look at an individual level and as an organization as a whole. Just again, going back to these cyber attacks, when organizations are shut down like Scripps, they have to revert to paper records, they have to cancel appointments, that's patients not receiving the care that they need, that's revenue not coming in the door. When you look at JBS, these plants are being shut down, meat production dips, meat prices go up, stock market goes down. So there's all these troubling trends, and it's almost just scary to think of like what's next, like how could this continue to get worse. So I think, yeah, we're just in a very interesting time. And I think just the thing to always keep in mind is we're next. How can we be proactive rather than reactive? Because the last thing you want to see is you on the HHS wall of shame, which had over 500 breaches in 2020 related to email, network, and et cetera. So I think it just has to be prioritized. That's, again, cybersecurity in the digital space is the new battleground. So these attacks are going to keep coming. The money is there. DarkSide, for example, from Colonial, they were paid $4 million. And in total, they received about 90 million in Bitcoin. So the money is there, and it's just going to keep growing and growing.
Very, very true. And I did put a link in the comments section for if anybody's interested in a free trial of Powbox's encrypted email solution, please click on that link. We hope that you've enjoyed our presentation today. I want to thank Paddy, Tony, and Travis all for their comments and their insights into this incredible security discussion that we had today. And thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you have a great week.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.